Hello and welcome back, and today I want to talk about the Synology DS1821 Plus and how it compares with the newly released QNAP TS-873A. Now both of these brands do have a lot of solutions for SMB, small, medium business, and of course prosumer users as well, and these two are very much a sweet spot in terms of overall storage available and the hardware that allows you to pretty much do everything the brand says that you are capable of doing. Now both of these solutions are available right now at time of recording in March 2021. Wow, this year's going quick. March 2021. And both of these solutions, being 8 bays of SATA storage, do provide a huge amount of storage potential. They do also have price tags that are actually surprisingly similar, both arriving at around $1,000 to $1,100 or so dollars. And again, doesn't quite factor in all the different currencies and different tax out there, so do double check first. But both of them, although being very similar in architecture with the same CPU and the same amount of storage available, have actually gone very, very different directions in terms of what you get for your money. Now, I don't have either one of them in the studio with me today, although we have already made videos on both of these devices. So right now we are using the graphics, as you can see on screen. But today we're going to talk about, ultimately, what makes these two such different NAS devices, and hopefully help you decide which one deserves your data and of course your money. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about what they've both got in common. I'm not going to talk too much about software in today's video, largely because I've done so many videos on QUTS and QTS and DSM 6.2 and DSM 7 that to go over that now for a number of you that have already learned about a lot of that stuff, it's not really fair. You'd have to wait a crap load of time listening to that. So do check out those videos where I've gone into so much detail about the individual applications that you can learn a lot more about which one of these is going to gel better with you in terms of software. Just know that Synology has a larger focus on software for your money than QNAP. I'd say when you buy any Synology product, it's 60% software, 40% hardware. And with QNAP, it's more of a balance 50-50. The Synology is far more, I would argue, a little bit more intuitive, definitely more user-friendly of the two. But the QNAP, a little bit more of a learning curve, but ultimately far more configurable and customizable. Again, I would say Nintendo, Sega. I would say console gamer, PC gamer. But again, check out my other software videos to see more about that. But what have these two got in common? Well, they're both great business solutions in terms of utilizing all of the files that you're going to generate in your business. They can be used for web servers, email servers. They can be used for surveillance. They can be used for multi-tier backup strategies with the cloud, local NAS to NAS, NAS to USB. They both have virtualization applications in Virtualization Station and Synology Virtual Machine Manager that can use first-party VM tools to host multiple VMs, as well as utilizing the likes of Hyper-V and VMware to port over or support or effectively clone third-party VM images and VHDs and VMDKs and stuff like that. So there's lots of ways in which you can enjoy virtualization. Both of these devices also support multimedia as well for photos, videos and music, with lots of dedicated applications, some of which involving AI, some of which involving metadata scraping to create a really, really evolved multimedia platform for home or business. They've both got surveillance applications in QVR Pro and Surveillance Station, QVR Elite as well, with 2 camera licenses included on the Synology in between 2 and 8, depending on the application you choose, available from the QNAP. Both of them are upgradable in a number of ways that we're going to talk about later in the video, and they both arrive with 3 years of manufacturer's warranty that can be extended to 5 years. Two very, very good solutions for home or business needs, both of which can pretty much do anything that the brands say their systems can do. These two systems, not only have you got the right sort of storage that can really support you for a number of years, that can be expanded as well, but also a decent enough bit of hardware there to support a multi-user, multi-application simultaneous environment. So, now you know what they've got in common, you want to know what's different. Well, both of these 8-bay solutions, although they arrive with the same CPU and support very, very similar peripherals from the outset, the file system option from the beginning is very, very different, with the Synology arriving with a choice of ext4 or BTRFS as the file system of choice. Now, ext4 we know about. ext4, one of the longest standing file systems, not just in storage, but just generally. BTRFS as an option does provide a number of more file management nuanced back-end sort of stuff that you won't see the benefits, but you'll feel the benefits. So, for example, you've got stuff like file self-healing, much like the ECC memory it includes. If corruption of data is noticed on a minor level, it will compare transmission of data as it passes through it, beginning and the end, and heal files as necessary. And again, this isn't going to be like a recovery of data scenario here, but it's for the avoidance of data corruption and bit rot that can happen later on. On top of that, shared folder duplication and recreation far more quicker. But probably one of the best things is background snapshots having a far lesser impact on systems resource utilization, so more snapshots and less of a feeling of slowdown when they're being generated. Lesser NASes when you enable snapshots will generally feel a little bit of a lag when snapshots are being recorded and maintained and the recycling of them long term. So BTRFS removes a lot of that, but it has to be said that BTRFS within the marketplace is less desired than ext4 at the business level, because it still seems a little green by comparison to ext4. BTRFS is being featured on more and more platforms, but it has to be said that a number of business users will go straight to the ext4 option for performance. It's the same with this device arriving with Synology Hybrid RAID or SHR. This system does arrive with that great fluid RAID system where you can mix and match drives, but again, as useful as that can be, bear in mind that it can lessen the performance just a little bit, and that's one of the reasons why Synology doesn't include SHR on their more grandiose ranges like the UC or SA or FS series. Now, what are QNAP bringing to the party there on the file system? Well, they've got ext4. They don't have that fluid RAID system there. They go with the traditional RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, RAID 6, RAID 10, etc., etc. But what they also bring to the party is ZFS. Now, zettabyte file system, ZFS there, that is far more desirable storage industry-wise. ZFS always has been a popular choice. ZFS does bring the ability for triple parity RAID there in the background. So again, very useful, RAID Z as well. But one of the other great things that it brings is the removal of the volume layer. Now, for those that aren't aware, when it comes to storage devices, you have your drives, you put them in a RAID, either all of them or you create individual RAIDs. They are known as storage pools. They are the pool of data. Now, in traditional ext4 or BTRFS, on top of that layer, you create these little containers of storage. They can be the full size of the available storage pool, that RAID there, or it can be multiple pools. Now, multiple containers, and these are called volumes. And from those volumes, your data can live, and you can choose that one's for surveillance, that one's for that, that's for that. You can do all that stuff if you choose. But that extra layer does have a small impact in terms of performance. It gets greater and greater depending on the RAID configuration and the complexity of creating the parity data, as well as all the individual volumes. On ZFS, it removes that volume layer. You are dealing with the storage pool. It removes the volume layer, and ultimately that improves performance. Also, it improves RAID rebuild, RAID resynchronization, RAID resilvering, that sort of thing. There's RAID scrubbing. All of these things are much faster to be done. With a RAID 5 on, say, 4 drives, rather than taking 6 to 8 to 12 hours, taking quite literally minutes to complete. On top of that, you have the added benefits within ZFS of file compression in real time to save space, so data moves to the NAS and then it's compressed. File deduplication, where files that are the same from multiple sources getting sent to the system, it will go, right, there's one of those, we know what that file is, we just record that it comes from all of those locations. Saves a lot of space, saves a lot of transition of data, and ultimately improves performance and saves time long term. Now, as good as ZFS sounds, and the fact that this arrives with ZFS as a choice at setup with QUTS Hero, it's worth highlighting that it is a hungry beast. ZFS requires a lot more resources to get the job done. In fact, this system arrives with 8 gig of memory by default compared with the 4 gig, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But it's worth remembering that even though it arrives with 8 gig, you can't take advantage of the full advantages of ZFS unless you go for 16 gig minimum. So if you want to take advantage of the full deduplication inline and inline data compression as well alongside deduplication, you can need more memory off the bat, and that's definitely a consideration there. It's got ZFS, which I love, but it's giving it to you with the proviso you're probably going to need a bit more memory down the line. So after that, we can talk about the CPU inside both of these devices, both arriving with the V1500B, that Ryzen embedded processor. It's a 2.2 GHz quad-core CPU, and again, its x86 64-bit architecture means it can run the gamut, can run GPU-enabled resources such as virtualization and 4K, but bear in mind, it doesn't have embedded graphics, so it's not going to be able to have a special part of the CPU to handle the more arduous and more resource-consuming elements of data, more visual data. Consequently, it will use more power than the likes of, say, even a Celeron to handle graphical tasks. It doesn't have a specific tailored graphics tool on board. So bear that in mind. Although both of them can run the gamut, the full range of applications from Synology and QNAP, bear in mind it is not a GPU-assisted CPU. Now, in terms of memory, both of these systems, thanks to that CPU, support DDR4 memory, but it's worth highlighting both systems have gone a slightly different way. Although both of them are arriving with 2400 MHz memory, it's worth highlighting that the Synology, arriving with 4 GB by default on a single stick, can be is ECC error code correction memory that can be upgraded up to 32 GB over 2 SODIMM slots. Now, ECC memory, much like the aforementioned BTRFS, includes file self-healing or bit self-healing. It takes an extra bit checksum there as data passes through it, and again this is very caveman, passes through it, and then if there's a change at the original, if there a change at the final piece of information it passes through the memory, it then repairs it. ECC is used by a lot of industry professionals to avoid data corruption, because small data corruption will always magnify over time as data passes through the system, and even just generally chronologically as its access can be problematic. And if you're dealing at a data center level, or you're dealing with spreadsheets, you are dealing with enormous databases that are comprised of infinitesimal calculations based on top of each other on the composite files underneath them, ECC memory can be incredibly advantageous. Just bear in mind you've got 4 GB there, and it can go up to 32 GB. On the QNAP, there is an ECC memory. You can install it, but again, it doesn't arrive with ECC memory. It's got 8 GB by default of DDR4, 2400 MHz memory, but although it supports ECC, it doesn't arrive with ECC. So QNAP giveth with our ZFS, but it taketh in the lack of ECC. Now, it is worth highlighting though that this system does support up to 64 GB of memory. Now that's a weird one given they're both using the same CPU there. That CPU does support 64 GB from what I've seen, but Synology with their first party memory doesn't have a 32 GB single SODIMM module, which might be the reason why they don't support more than 32 GB on there, which is not so sure about that. I'm not a big fan if that is true. But 64 GB in terms of virtualization, in terms of surveillance, in terms of a multi-user access environment, and for many of you, it will be more advantageous than ECC memory. So that may play a part. But once again, as mentioned, remember the 8 GB inside isn't quite enough to take advantage of the full range of ZFS advantages. So bear in mind that if you're going to take advantage of that inline compression, inline deduplication, particularly the latter, you're going to have to ramp up to 16 GB there. Also, in terms of internal hardware, we can talk about NVMe and PCIe. Now, in terms of NVMe, both of these devices have got NVMe M2 slots inside, but as is the case with most Synology systems, you can only utilize it for caching. That is, taking the useful abilities, the high performance, high IOPS and low latency of the NVMe SSDs in a RAID environment and present them to the more affordable, larger capacity, but slower mechanical hard drives in the main RAID storage bays, those 8 bays on the front. So, as useful as that is, and Synology have really done a good job eking as much performance out of that, those performance benefits are only really going to be felt by smaller file access and definitely more regularly accessed files. Big single images and blob data and just large video files, anything big, it's just too big to see the advantage there. It's the small, it's the databases, it's the spreadsheets, it's the wide array of files where you are accessing many small and largely unnamed files at any given time. And again, some virtual machines will see those benefits as well, rather than single images. That's where that caching will be at its best. Now, in the QNAP, again, it's one of those things, QNAP giveth, QNAP taketh away, in that they let you have those M2 NVMe slots as well, and they let you use it for caching and raw storage. You can stick a storage pool on those NVMe's and take advantage of fast speeds, and deal with data directly on that fast layer, allowing the main 8 bays to have either full hard drives for archival storage, or half populate with hard drives, half with some SATA SSDs, and create a lovely little tier storage system with QTier. But it's worth remembering that due to the CPU lanes on that main Ryzen processor and how they're spread across the system, the PCIe's inside are PCIe Gen 3 times 1, so 1000 megs each. So even though you might be putting in a PCIe Gen 3 SSD, and a lot of the more modern ones like your Seagate Iron Wolf 520s and your WD Black 750s, that sort of thing, you're not going to get the promoted 3,000 to 4,000 megs. You're going to get 1,000 megs per slot. So a potential in a RAID of no more than 2,000 megs at the very top end. It's still good, but it's worth highlighting you're not going to see that speed. To my mind, there isn't any NVMe Gen 3 times 1 SSDs out there. So you're going to be putting in Gen 3 times 2 or Gen 3 times 4 SSDs and then immediately have them bottleneck. So although you can use them for fast acting performance storage, do bear that in mind. And if you stick a PCIe Gen 2 times 4 NVMe inside there, you're still limited by the gen rather than the time. So bear that in mind. So great to have them, but not quite the full complement of speed. So that's going to make a difference for a number of you. The other thing worth highlighting, of course, is they've both got PCIe upgrade slots. The Synology arrives with a single PCIe Gen 3 times 8 slot with a potential 8,000 megabytes per second connectivity between the card and the system. So if you're going to be utilizing their new fiber channel card, a 25G card there, then that card with 2 ports is going to be giving you 50 GBE or 5,000 megabytes per second there. So again, still not fully utilizing that. And if you have this 8 bay with the 2 5-bay expansions either side, you're going to get a lot of saturation. I'm not 100% you're going to saturate that full connection, but it's still nice that you've got that option. In the case of the QNAP, you have 2 PCIe Gen 3 times 4 slots, so 4,000 megs per slot for cards installed, and there's a wider array of cards available on the QNAP platform. Synology does support Intel and Mellanox cards, but they do have a tendency to highlight their own cards more than any other. I know there are Mellanox 40 GBE cards out there that potentially allow you to fully saturate that Gen 3 times 8 PCIe slot. I will say that I cannot see a scenario over SATA-based connections with an 8 and 2 5-bay expansions on JBOD. Even if you RAID 0'd the whole thing, I don't think you'd hit that 8,000. If you want to prove me wrong, please do so. But on the QNAP, there is support of Wi-Fi 6 cards, there's support of GPU cards, there's support of N2 NVMe upgrade cards to add more super fast storage to each of those slots. And although each slot will cap at 4,000 each, it's nice to be able to install 2 cards rather than 1 and then have some wasted bandwidth. It's better to have 2 slots that you can max out with 2 different services. Now, bear in mind that the QNAP system is still going to have that Ryzen as the main hat there, the thing that decides what can possibly be done. All the memory in the world's not going to make a difference if the CPU is just melted. So bear in mind that although the QNAP seems to have more customization and flexibility in how you can upgrade, that Ryzen still may present itself as a bottleneck to take advantage of it. And in that scenario, the Gen 3 times 8 may seem like the more mature long-term choice for you. Now, next we can talk about external connectivity, with both of these devices arriving with similar but yet weirdly different external connections. The Synology arrives with 4 1GBE LAN ports there at around 100 megs each, or with the support of link aggregation up to 4 GBE or over 400 megs together. There's also failover and load balancing supported on there for different kinds of architecture. The system also arrives with USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports at 5 gigabits per second each that support external storage and some supported peripherals like UPSs or printers and the like. There's also those eSATA ports there to attach those expansion devices, allowing you to bolt on another 10 bays of JBOD storage, with the main RAID being controlled by the system. If you set up the right SHR, you can expand that storage, just make sure you get the provisioning just right. But ultimately, that is the connections on the system. I think Synology, again, have played a little bit safe there. There is a 10 GB version of this device, but in 6 bays, known as the DS1821 XS Plus, with similar architecture, but it has 10G and a Xeon inside. But it does give you a lot for your money, and there is that upgradability there with the PCIe. Now, on the QNAP, there is USB once again. There's a USB 3.2 Gen 1 port, that 5 gig connection, but only a single port, because the other remaining 3 USBs are USB 3.2 Gen 2 at 10 gigabit each, which means the likes of much faster external drives. There is also expandable options that use those USB ports, as well as PCIe upgrade slots as well. Those USBs can even be used for a lot more network supported peripherals with USB to 2.5G and 5G upgrade adapters that use bus power, something that officially isn't supported by the Synology, but unofficially there are third-party apps that you can, drivers that you can install to use those adapters, although where that sits on the support of your warranty, tricksy. Now, the QNAP also has LAN ports. It only has 2 LAN ports compared with the 4 on the Synology, but these 2 are 2.5 GBE each. So again, 2.5 GBE or around 250 megabytes, and with link aggregation, you can get up to 500 megabytes per second there or thereabout, or 5 GBE. Again, much like the USB ports there, as good as that all sounds, it has to be remembered that you're not going to be able to take advantage of the network ports or the USB ports and their improved bandwidth unless the peripherals and devices in your hardware environment are set up for that as well. If you don't have a laptop, a switch, a system with at least 2.5 GBE, you're going to be bottlenecked to 1 anyway. Same goes to the USB devices. If they're not USB 3.2 Gen 2 compatible and architecture to start with, they're going to bottleneck anyway. So a lot of these options for a number of you are going to be about future-proofing and having that hardware later on as the rest of your architecture evolves. If you're not going to evolve that way anyway, it might be wasted money on you. And remember, the PCIe upgradability may well be future-proof enough on either one of these 2 solutions. And that's really it. They're quite similar in most other regards, with all of their range of software and applications. Both have 3 years of warranty that can be extended, both of which are desktop in 4, both of which internal 250 watt PSUs, both using metal chassis. And their ambient noise at this threshold isn't really comparable. There'll be the odd scenario where one is more noisy than the other or vice versa, but there isn't enough to make a compelling case to say one is noisier than the other. Same goes with power consumption, because it's only when these devices are being maxed out that you will see any difference there. And once you reach that stage of maxing them out, power consumption and ambient noise level become largely immaterial and unavoidable. But me personally, in terms of future-proofing hardware, the QNAP wins by a country mile. The Synology still has that great intuitive software that replaces a lot of the third-party apps from Skype to Office 365 and stuff like that in your environment with their own first-party alternatives, hence why the brand has that shifting focus of 60-40 for the price tag in software and hardware. The QNAP has great software, but it's just a little bit more of a learning curve, and they have a tendency to release a lot of applications and improve them and develop them in their lifetime, whereas Synology have a tendency to release their software in a much more finished form early doors. And I think a number of us that, again, I make comparisons very, very often against these brands with Nintendo versus Sega, or console gamer versus PC gamer. But I do think how that money goes into software and hardware when you buy these devices will largely define which one of them is best suited for your storage needs for home or business. Just remember, 50-50 hardware, software, 60/40 software hardware over here. Other than that, let me know which one is the one that you think you're going to go for. If you've got any questions, sling them in the comments, but more precisely, I'd head over to NAS Compares and use our free advice section where I can help you decide the right solution for you. It's just myself that mans that advice section there, so I can't promise the answers will be quick, but I can say they will be unbiased, and hopefully I can help you take your considerations to heart. But click like if you've enjoyed this video, click subscribe to learn more, and I will see you next time.